Alrighty, everyone. It is June 23rd, 2025. I am Michael Winkler, and this is the Mike Wink Show. So we're going to hop in today talking about the new Social Security Trustees Report that just came out a few days ago for the year of 2025. So a little history for those unfamiliar. Social Security was founded somewhere in the beginning of the 20th century, I believe around the 1930s, and existed fine for 30 or 40 years until around the 70s when Reagan was in office. And they realized that they were going to have a problem with the solvency of Social Security. And that at the time, and for most of Social Security's existence, more money was being paid into the program through the payroll tax than was being paid out in benefits being paid out in Social Security benefits. Well, they realized because of the baby boom that eventually, at some point in the near future, they're going to have a problem where more money is being drawn out in benefits than is being put in payroll taxes. And so, to help rectify this upcoming problem, the Reagan administration instituted what's called the Social Security Trust Fund. Now, prior to the trust fund, when, let's say, Social Security took in $100 in payroll taxes and only had $80 in benefits to pay out, that $20 difference of what they would have, that $20 difference would be put straight into the general tax pool, right? It would go right into military funding or whatever that general tax pool that the federal government pulls from to fund the vast majority of its programs. When they instituted the trust fund, what the trust fund does is it takes any excess that they have and puts it into a trust fund. And so that trust fund can slowly build up, and that in the future, when you have years where more money is being paid out in benefits than is being paid in through the payroll tax, they can just pull from the trust fund, and there won't be any problem with the ability of the United States to pay out full Social Security benefits. Well, that trust fund accumulated for a while and started to grow, and eventually it reached that point where it reached the inflection point where more money was needing to be paid out than was being paid in because of the baby boom and whatnot. And so now we've had a number of decades in a row where more money is being paid out than is being paid into the program. And so that means that the Social Security Trust Fund is slowly being depleted. Year by year, it's more and more of it is having to be taken away to make up the difference in the payroll tax for the Social Security benefits that are being paid out. Well, it was predicted that, what the Social Security Trust Fund Trustees Report does is determines the solvency of the trust fund. So they've determined they have a projected date at what time the trust fund will run out of money if nothing is done. Each year, the report seems to be pulling that date where the trust fund is going to become insolvent closer and closer to us. I believe it used to be somewhere in the 2040s, then it was in the high 2030s, and now, as far as I saw from this report, it's saying that 2032 is when their projected date of when the trust fund is going to completely run out, and that Social Security when the trust fund runs out, Social Security will still exist. So anybody who tries to claim that Social Security is insolvent or will go bankrupt or something does not understand Social Security. What will happen, though, if the trust fund runs out and it becomes insolvent, is that Social Security will only be able to pay out somewhere in the range of 80% of its benefits through the next 100 years. So what that means is if you were entitled to $100 in Social Security benefits and the trust fund runs out, you will only be able to receive $80 of your owed $100 in benefits because the trust fund is typically what would make up that $20 difference. The payroll tax is only able to cover 80% of the total benefits that are going out. Now, you may ask, why does the payroll tax only cover this amount when it used to cover more? Well, the payroll tax hasn't changed for the most part. I think it's gone through some small changes here or there over the decades, but for the most part, it's stayed around the same couple percentage. But what has not changed is the cap. So Social Security tax, the payroll tax, that money that's pulled straight out of your payroll stub, there's a cap on it. So every dollar up to $160,000 you make in income is taxed at the 3 or 4 or 5% that the payroll tax is. But every dollar you make above, I believe it's $165,000 is not subject to the payroll tax. So what that means is that was not a problem for a long time because the payroll tax captured somewhere in the low mid 90% of all income in the United States. So that 4 or 5% under 160K captured something like 93% of all income in the United States. But as inflation increases over the decades, as it naturally does, and income inequality increases, which it doesn't naturally do, but it has happened. There's been a significant increase in income inequality in the United States over the last couple of decades. There's more dollars above $160,000 per year being made than there ever has. And that's created a scenario in which only about, I believe it's somewhere in the low mid 80 percentile of all income in the U.S. right now is being captured by the payroll tax, because more money than ever before is being made above that $160,000 threshold. Now, that difference of where we're at now, about mid-low 80% of captured income in the United States being subject to the payroll tax, where it used to be in the low mid 90 percentile, that difference of 5 to 10% is that delta is the difference between the solvency of the trust fund. It is the entire difference of the solvency of the trust fund. And so all you have to do, there's an extremely easy, straightforward, and 100% logical fix to this, and it's just to either raise or completely eliminate the Social Security payroll tax cap, which completely makes sense. I don't understand why the payroll tax cap wouldn't be indexed to at least inflation in the first place. That seems like a no-brainer to me. But on top of the inflation, you have the problem of income inequality that's only exacerbated the problem even more. So at bare minimum, the increase in the Social Security payroll tax cap needs to be indexed to inflation or in some sort of way. But that means that because it hasn't been raised, that is the obvious fix. Now, there are a couple of other fixes that people propose for this, but I think they're far, far worse and far less logical, right? There's one that involves cutting benefits. So one way you could fix the solvency of the trust fund is basically just reduce, if they're going to not be able to pay out 20% of their benefits, in 10 years or so, just cut the benefits 20% and then they'll be able to pay it out fine. Well, the problem with that is we live in the year 2025, right? We have plenty of resources, plenty of funding. There is no reason we should be cutting Social Security at this point. If anything, we should be expanding it. We have more than the ability as a society to ensure that our old retired people live a dignified, decent retirement lifestyle. Like they don't have to live in squalor. We more than have the ability to do that. So I think the idea of cutting Social Security is a non-starter for me personally. Could also increase the payroll tax cap. That's another potential proposal. But I don't like that proposal nearly as much because it shifts the burden more onto lower income people, right? The Social Security payroll tax is already arguably a regressive tax in some ways in that it's capped, right? Rich people aren't subject to that same tax. And so I don't like the idea of like just raising the payroll tax cap from 5% to 6% or whatever, because they're pulling the funding from the wrong demographics of people, the wrong socioeconomic demographics. So I don't think raising the payroll tax is it's better than cutting the funding, but I don't think it's nearly the best way to do it. I think by far the best way to handle this situation is just either raise or completely remove the payroll tax cap. I've heard some people propose the donut hole proposal for the payroll tax cap, which honestly feels pretty silly. It's better than doing nothing, but it just feels sort of like a weird wonky way of doing it. And the donut proposal is basically that like you blow a hole in the cap. So like you have every dollar up to $160,000 is subject to the tax. But then every dollar between 160 and say 250K is not subject to the tax. But then every dollar after 250K is subject to the tax. So that there's sort of this donut hole middle section that's not subject to the tax. That seems pretty stupid and unnecessary to me, but they could do that. And it would be better than doing nothing or cutting the funding. So yeah, let's see what this report has to say. What retirees need to know about Social Security's funding deficit. The 2025 Social Security Trustees Report estimates that the Social Security retirement benefits might be cut by 23% in the year 2033. That estimate assumes Congress doesn't act to close Social Security's funding deficit, which in today's polarized political climate is appearing more likely. So my soft prediction of what will happen come 2033, I'd love to see if I could pull up this video in 10 years and see if I'm correct. But I have a feeling that the cynical part of me is taken over on this, and that the Republicans really, really want Social Security cut, and well, most of them to remove the program completely. Now, they understand that's very unpopular and that a large chunk of their constituency relies on Social Security and is in support of Social Security. So they kind of have to play this game where they like pretend like they don't want to destroy it, but also they very much want to destroy it. So like they're sort of in betweeny. I think that this gives them the absolute perfect opportunity to effectively achieve what they've been wanting to achieve of cutting Social Security, right? If cutting the actual benefits through a bill saying we're going to reduce Social Security benefits by 20% is far too unpopular for them to actually do, but it's what they want to do, this seems like a great way to get that sort of thing done without having to face the backlash of it, right? They just basically let this expire, right? This will become more urgent as 2033 becomes closer. But let's say it's 2032 or whatever, and this is like the topic of the day, and everybody's talking about it. What we're going to do about it? I think it's very convenient. It would be far too easy for the Republicans to just basically ignore it, not pay attention, not engage with it, basically do whatever they need to do to not vote and ensure that a reform, a way to fix it is not passed, and that it essentially just breaks. They let it die on the vine. They let the trust fund become insolvent, and then they effectively get their 20% Social Security cut. I think now the more astute person would say, now hold on, if it's being pulled out of the trust fund, if 20% of the funding is being pulled out of the trust fund and they haven't raised the taxes, this way of cutting Social Security by 20% effectively doesn't really save taxpayers any money, right? It's not even an anti-big government move. And I would argue that it's more of a cruelty move, right? They see poor people and old people getting money through this redistributive program as inherently wrong. They lie awake at night in their bed, not being able to sleep, panicked about the idea of a poor person getting more money or more resources than they believe they're owed. And so I think that's where the cruelty factor really comes in, is I think this just touches on their desire to cut Social Security and the cruelty factor way, way too well. And I think they're most likely just going to let it die on the vine, and that they're not going to do anything, and then it's going to be a big hubbub, and you might have, or maybe you'll have a John McCain moment sort of thing where like there's a big hubbub, most of the Republicans are against it, you kind of know what's going to happen, but then you maybe have one holdout Republican who prevents all of this from falling apart or something. I don't know. It's so hard to predict that far out in advance, but assuming that the ethos of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party doesn't change significantly between now and 2033, I would predict that the Republicans are just going to let it die on the vine and let it become insolvent and make no effort to fix it because they don't want to fix it. They want it to be gone. With 2033 just 8 years away, just 8 years, just 2 whole elections, almost an entire decade, just 8 years, it's nothing. You'll most likely still be alive then if you're reading this post. So let's look at what pre-retirees and retirees need to know about this troubling situation and what they can do about it. The 2025 Social Security Trustees Report projects that old age and survivor insurance trust fund can pay 100% of retiree and survivor benefits until year 2033. At that time, the Social Security Trust Fund is projected to be depleted under the trustees' best estimates. Unless Congress acts to close this funding deficit, revenues from FICA taxes paid by workers will be the only source available to pay retirees and survivors benefits. Like I said, yes, when the trust fund is not there, they no longer can pull from the trust fund to make up the difference of their Social Security benefit payouts versus the payroll tax pay-ins. And so the only funding that Social Security would get at that point is exclusively through the payroll tax and what is being paid in on a year-to-year basis. These revenues can only support 77% of the benefits needed for retirees and survivors, according to the best estimates in the report. This would result in projected benefit reductions of 23%. It's important to know that Social Security would not be completely bankrupt if the OASI and DI trust funds were depleted, as some people might think. Workers would still be paying their FICA taxes, which would fund the benefits of retirees, survivors, and disabled beneficiaries. As a result, benefits wouldn't disappear entirely, even if the trust funds were to be depleted. Yes, 100% correct. Benefits for retirees, survivors, and disabled beneficiaries are financed almost exclusively by FICA taxes, income tax on Social Security benefits, and interest on trust fund reserves. As a result, there are basically three ways for Congress to close Social Security's funding deficit: reduce benefits for future retirees, current retirees, or both, increase FICA taxes paid by workers, and or find other sources of financing, such as using the federal government's general revenues or imposing new taxes such as tariffs. I'm assuming that increased FICA taxes paid by workers and or included in that one is the raising of the payroll tax. If this article does not mention the raising of the payroll tax, I'm going to lose my goddamn mind. And it would make me think that this article is actually facetiously written as a way to try and propagandize people into being against Social Security. If they don't actually mention it, I'm going to seriously get all conspiracy brained on this. Predictably, Democrats want to close the funding deficit mostly with tax increases, while Republicans want mostly to cut benefits. If you're eligible for Social Security retirement benefits but haven't yet started them, you might be tempted to start them as soon as possible before they're reduced. Not so fast. Delaying benefits might still be your best strategy for maximizing your expected lifetime Social Security benefits. You can analyze your best strategy should there be a benefits reduction with Open Social Security, a helpful free online Social Security optimizer program. The summary of the trustees' report contains a compelling call to action. Quote, "The 2025 trustees' reports indicate a need for substantial changes to address Social Security and Medicare's financial challenges. The trustees recommend that lawmakers address the projected trust fund shortfalls in a timely way in order to phase in necessary changes gradually and give workers and beneficiaries time to adjust their expectations and behavior. Implementing changes sooner rather than later would allow more generations to share in the needed revenue increases or reductions in scheduled benefits. With informed discussion, creative thinking, and timely legislative action, Social Security and Medicare can continue to protect future generations." Well said. Congress, working Americans, and retirees should take the 2025 Social Security Trustees Report as a flashing red light for a call to action. I 100% agree. I also am furious that this article did not mention the super obvious, straightforward, clear, 100% anybody who's not anybody using their brain would think that this is the obvious best choice is to just raise or completely remove the payroll tax cap. It is the obvious solution to the solvency of the Social Security Trust Fund and our ability to continue paying out full Social Security benefits for the next 100 plus years. If we just raise this payroll tax cap to $250,000 or something from 160, I'm pretty sure it makes the trust fund solvent for the next 150 years or something. And if you remove the tax completely, I'm pretty sure this trust fund would be solvent forever. If you remove the tax completely, though, I think we would need to restructure how we do the trust fund a little bit, because you might get so much being paid into the trust fund that it would just keep growing and growing and growing into a ridiculous extent, and that there would be just tons of money sitting in this Social Security trust fund's account for no reason, or doing nothing, or not being as valued as it could be. Yeah, I don't think this article is being facetious. It's just they really, I think every time somebody talks about Social Security, they have to mention the raising of the payroll tax cap. They have to mention the raising of the payroll tax cap. Most people don't even know that the payroll tax is capped. Most people don't know that, in fact, most people don't know that Social Security is funded through the payroll tax. But most people don't understand even that the payroll tax is capped. It's frustrating. But the obvious answer is just raising the payroll tax cap. Just like I predicted, the U.S. has hopped in and hopped in on the side of Israel against Iran. This is not surprising whatsoever. Donald Trump wants war for selfish reasons. He probably thinks it's good for his legacy, probably thinks it's good for his polling numbers and whatnot. So yeah, I think the U.S. just came in and bombed specifically a couple of their nuclear facilities. I don't really know much details about them. I saw a before and after picture of I think it's the Fordow plant in the mountains that Israel could not hit by themselves and needed the U.S. to use their bunker buster bombs or whatever that I read in some other report. I saw a before and after picture of the facility of a satellite imaging, and it looked exactly the same. So hopefully this article gives a little bit more information about how effective the U.S. strikes were. Iran's government is weighing how to respond after the U.S. military launched a series of coordinated bombing attacks Saturday against 3 Iranian nuclear facilities in a major escalation of the ongoing Middle East conflict. The strikes were intended to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear program. The strikes were intended to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, according to U.S. officials. President Trump said in a Truth Social post Saturday evening that the American assault was very successful. Earlier in June, Israel began bombing nuclear facilities and other sites across Iran. The two countries have been trading deadly attacks since then, and the U.S. military has helped intercept missiles and drones fired at Israel. But the U.S. did not get directly involved in the Israeli offensive until the surprise strikes on Saturday. Iran's foreign minister called the U.S. military operation an outrageous, grave, and unprecedented violation of the United Nations Charter and international law. I'm pretty sure your Sharia law that you've got going on there, Iran, violates UN Charter and international law in a whole bunch of different ways, all right? So this is pot calling the kettle black. This makes no sense. You're so hypocritical for them to even claim that. This is more crying. This is more we're losing and we're going to cry about it. Here's what to know about the U.S. attack on Iran and what could come next. The mission dubbed Operation Midnight Hammer began at midnight on Friday when a group of B-2 stealth bombers took off from an Air Force base near Kansas City, Missouri, according to Joint Chief of Staff Chairman General Dan Kane, who briefed reporters on Sunday. Some bombers flew west as decoys, while the other planes that would ultimately strike Iranian nuclear sites flew east. Those B-2s dropped 14 bunker buster bombs on multiple targets at the Fordow and Natanz sites between roughly 6:40 p.m. and 7:05 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. At around 5 p.m. Eastern ET time, just as the bombers were entering Iranian airspace, a submarine launched more than 24 Tomahawk missiles at the Isfahan nuclear site. The mission involved more than 125 aircraft and resulted in 75 precision-guided weapons being dropped on the three locations, officials said. And they emphasized that this attack was against Iran's nuclear program, not against its military or people. But UN Security General Antonio Guterres said he was gravely alarmed by the American use of force, calling the U.S. strikes a dangerous escalation in a region already on the edge, and a direct threat to international peace and security. Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs condemned the attack too, calling it irresponsible and a gross violation of international law. Yeah, Russia's Foreign Ministry calling it a gross violation of international law. That's so rich. Oh my gosh, this is this article is like a conference of hypocrisy. It's crazy. And so Iran, and also them saying that the U.S. strike over there is a dangerous escalation in a region already on the edge and a direct threat to international peace and security. Isn't Iran an insane theocracy that has Sharia law and is completely devoid from reality? Them having nuclear weapons or the capability to make nuclear weapons is not a direct threat to international peace and security. I would think that is the ultimate threat to international peace and security, right? It is one of the few ways that the whole world could be ended based on something really stupid, on the whims of an insane theocrat if they wanted. I've talked about this before. I have mixed feelings about the U.S. getting involved in this, all right? On one hand, regime change has proven not to work. And so to that extent, I think the U.S. getting involved, trying to topple the Iranian government is probably not a worthwhile thing. It's probably only a negative thing. Is not going to work like they intend to, could have severe negative consequences, is going to cost a ton of money. I think regime change doesn't work. But I am very much against theocracies. And I'm very much against theocracies having the ability to make nuclear weapons or having nuclear weapons. And so from that perspective, I'm in favor of getting whatever it takes to get nuclear weapons or the capability to make nuclear weapons out of the hands of an insane theocracy like Iran. Now, can you parse out destroying their nuclear capabilities and regime change? I think it's pretty difficult to parse those two out. I think it's theoretically possible, but realistically, practically, I think they almost always have to go hand in hand. And so that, on top of the fact that I have zero faith that the Trump administration would handle our role in a Middle East conflict well at all. I have zero faith. In fact, I have opposite faith. I have cynicism. I think that they would only make dumb decisions that would compromise American security and cost us a ton of money for very little gain. That would be my prediction. But I'm on the fence, okay? in a vacuum, in theory, I might be in favor of helping Israel destroy Iran's nuclear capabilities. But I have no faith in this administration being able to do that in a properly parsed out way, parsing it from regime change. And Trump's comments regarding regime change, hopefully this article will cover that, show that that is the case. Republicans largely backed Trump's move, while many Democrats were skeptical. Senate Majority Leader John Thune said Iran had rejected all diplomatic pathways to peace. It seems like that is the case, at least to some degree. Yet many Democrats accused Trump of sidestepping the Constitution by directing the military to attack Iran without seeking congressional approval first. Okay, but like presidents have been doing that since fucking like Bill Clinton, since like George Bush Sr. I think even before that, the United States government has not taken seriously the separation, like the allocation of the wartime powers to Congress. The U.S. government has not taken that seriously for decades and decades, for a number of different presidential administrations. Right? We have, Obama, Bush Sr., Clinton, they all had their own military excursions that were not technically wars, not approved by Congress. They were special military operations or whatever verbiage they used to justify it. But precedent has shown that Congress basically does not need to. They technically need the congressional approval to do this kind of thing, but like this is not new that they're doing this without congressional approval, is what it seems like this article is making it seem like. Obama was doing stuff like this without congressional approval. George Bush Jr. and Sr. was, Clinton was. This is nothing new, and so I think without congressional approval, directing the military to attack Iran without seeking congressional approval first is a very, very weak criticism because, yes, it would be really nice if that rule was actually followed and that for the U.S., for the president to send our troops and, our money to spend our military budget and send our troops to go die doing military operations that it should have congressional approval, but it just doesn't. I think if it was a full-out, all-on war, then we might need congressional approval, but Representative Jim Himes of Connecticut, the highest-ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, called the strike a clear violation of the Constitution, which grants the power to declare war explicitly to Congress. It is true. He's very technically correct. Senator Mark Kelly, a Democrat from Arizona, said on Meet the Press that Iran wasn't posing an immediate threat to the U.S. before the strike. That's probably true. I don't think that's probably true. I would say when there's been a clear and imminent threat to U.S. citizens, to the United States, to the homeland, the commander-in-chief has a right to act, he said. Well, okay, I don't know if I agree with that assessment, though. He's basically saying we can't shoot first. We have to wait till they shoot. It's like that scene in Hotel Rwanda where the UN peacekeepers or the generals telling the UN peacekeepers, put your weapon down, don't shoot. They're only allowed to shoot when they shoot. That's basically what he's saying, right? We should only be allowed to shoot when they shoot first. But like if we know for a fact that Iran, like theoretically, hypothetically, I don't think this is the case, but like hypothetically we get some intelligence that Iran is on a roadmap to make a nuke in 5 years and send it to the US, I think it's totally reasonable for us to then go in before they actually are an immediate imminent threat when they have the nuke, to go in and stop them before they reach that point. So it's a weird point to make. While the reaction among politicians largely fell on party lines, it didn't do so exclusively. Kentucky Republican Representative Thomas Macy said Congress has the sole authority to authorize war and should have been called back from vacation before the attacks. So this is where I've seen Trump, being the anti-war candidate, of course, is only there to go after the nuclear facilities, right? Trump has already walked back on this. As far as I understand, he first came out and was like, hey, we're going to do this exclusively to go after their nuclear facilities. We're not doing regime change. But then he came out literally like the next day and was like, so we're doing regime change, right, guys? The Trump administration is continuing to try to figure out exactly how effective its strike was in degrading Iran's ability to build a nuclear weapon. Final battle damage will take some time, Kane said, but initial battle damage assessments indicate that all 3 sites sustained extremely severe damage and destruction. 2 independent experts analyzing commercial satellite imagery told NPR that the nation's long-running nuclear enterprise is far from destroyed, adding that Iran likely still has stocks of highly enriched uranium. The IAEA also said that Iranian authorities hadn't reported a jump in off-site radiation following the bombings on Saturday, and that it didn't expect there to be any health impacts on people outside the 3 sites. That would make sense to me, right? If these sites are buried super, super deep underground, then I would imagine the fallout from destroying said facilities, even if you were to inadvertently create some sort of dirty bomb by hitting enriched uranium, it would still be all relatively contained within the underground facility, and that its ability to harm, like, the surface is limited. Another open question is whether Iran will retaliate against the U.S. in response to the attack, and what form that retaliation would take. I'm not going to bury the lead here, but we're going to cover a story where Iran has started attacking U.S. military bases in the Middle East just this morning. Kane said U.S. forces remain on high alert and would respond to any Iranian retaliation or proxy attacks. The U.S. operates permanent military bases in several countries near Iran, including Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. The State Department doubled on the number of emergency evacuation flights for American citizens leaving Israel and is evacuating non-essential staff from the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon, the Associated Press reported. In a Truth Social post Sunday afternoon, Trump floated the possibility of regime change in Iran. Yeah, so he's already walked it back from this exclusively being a nuclear-centered strike to, so we're doing regime change, right, guys? That's happening. It's not politically correct to use the term regime change, but if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change? Mega. Mega. Oh my God. MIGA mega. Make Iran great again. I'm going to lose my mind. Oh my God. That's one of the funniest things I've ever seen. We live in an Onion article. We live in an alternate universe that is created by the Onion. That is satirical in nature. Entirely. Oh my God, that's hilarious. So yeah, this came out just this morning. This does surprise me quite a bit because I would have expected Iran to basically just roll over and take the U.S. bombings on their nuclear sites and just sort of accept it. And that they know they don't want to have to actually fight the U.S. directly. Like, they can mess with Israel, and they know the U.S. doesn't have that much of a penchant to get really into a war on Israel's side. And to that extent, they don't want to mess with the U.S. directly because they don't want to awaken the sleeping giant. Well, it appears that they continue their string of really poor decisions and have begun hitting U.S. bases in Qatar and Iraq. Iran launched missile attacks Monday on U.S. military bases in Qatar and Iraq, retaliating for the American bombing of its nuclear sites and escalating tensions in the volatile region. Qatar condemned the attack on Al Udeid Air Base. Qatar condemned the attack on Al Udeid Air Base attack, but said it successfully intercepted the missiles and no casualties were reported. It said its airspace was now safe. Okay, so Qatar... Yeah, because Qatar is, I guess, a soft ally of ours, so they shot down... Okay, so it's interesting. They protected the base for us. Iran said that the attack in Qatar matched the number of bombs dropped by the United States on its nuclear sites this weekend, signaling its likely desire to de-escalate. Yeah, okay, so if they're saying, hey guys, we dropped the exact number of bombs you did, not a single one more, to me that shows that this was mostly performative, and that they know they don't want a war with the U.S. Iran also said it targeted the base because it was outside of populated areas. It would not now, this is not me giving Iran any credence or any credit here, but it would not blow my mind if, like, the analysis on the Iranians' part is basically this, that this attack happened from the U.S. We have to respond in some kind of way. It can be entirely symbolic and not serious. And I think that's the route they've gone. They've basically gone for a pseudo-symbolic gesture to their people saying, hey, we're not going to let America do this. We're going to fight back, yada, yada, yada. And so they probably fired missiles at a base that they had a pretty good idea wasn't going to get, like they had I wouldn't surprise me if they specifically chose this target and specifically chose this number of missiles because they knew that there was a low chance of it actually causing any serious damage, killing personnel, or doing anything that would really piss off the U.S. and cause them to get into it more. And so this, to me, screams like this is more of a performative act. The Ain al-Assad base housing U.S. troops in western Iraq was also targeted. It wasn't immediately clear if there was damage to the Iraq base or any injuries. The retaliation came a day after the U.S. launched a surprise attack Sunday morning on 3 of Iran's nuclear sites. Earlier in the day, Israel expanded its war against Iran to include targets associated with the country's struggling theocracy, striking the gate of a Tehran prison notorious for holding political activists and hitting the headquarters of a military force that suppressed recent protests. As plumes of thick smoke rose over Tehran, Israel was attacked with yet another barrage of Iranian missiles and drones. The persistent fire has become a reality for civilians in both countries since Israel started the war to target Tehran's rapidly advancing nuclear program. On the 11th day of the conflict, Israel said it attacked regime targets and government repression bodies in the heart of Tehran. But Israeli officials insisted they did not seek the overthrow of Iran's government, their arch-enemy since the country's 1979 Islamic Revolution. Okay, so this to me seems like they do want regime change, right? I don't think that they'd be going after... another article we read talked about them going after... a specific police force that Iran uses to go after protests and quell dissent and whatnot. This combined with them saying that they've bombed a prison, specifically a prison that's used to target political dissidents and whatnot, shows to me that like they really are going for regime change, but they're kind of trying to do it in the sneaky internal way. They're trying to like facilitate it internally rather than like bring in 20,000 troops and then like do it the old school classic way. I think they're trying to like make it happen from within. They're trying to plant the seeds there and water it so that the revolution and the overthrowing the regime change happens from within and so that they can kind of have their hands mostly clean of it. The Israeli military warned Iranians that it would continue to attack military sites around Tehran over the coming days as its focus has shifted to symbolic targets as well. The military issued the warning on the social media platform X, though Iranians are struggling to access the outside world as an internet shutdown has crippled the country. Yeah, I wonder if that's probably partly why we've seen so few videos of the result of the bombing that's been happening in Tehran and the rest of Iran, is because not only are outside international news agencies, as far as I'm aware, not allowed to come in and report. If they have a full internet blackout, how are people at all expected to get videos of the bombing and whatnot out? So it's really hard for us to know what's going on there. It's very easy for us to know what's going on in Israel because they don't have an internet blackout. Everybody has a phone. It's different. If the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be regime change? He asked on his Truth Social website. According to an Israeli official familiar with the government's strategy, Israel is targeting these sites to put pressure on the Iranian administration, but is not actively seeking to topple it. In Vienna, the head of the United Nations nuclear watchdog said he expected there to be heavy damage at the Fordow facility following Sunday's U.S. airstrike there with sophisticated bunker buster bombs. Iran said the U.S. had crossed a very big red line with its risky gambit to strike the 3 sites with missiles and 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs. Several Iranian officials, including Atomic Energy Organization of Iran spokesman Behrouz Kamalavandi, have claimed Iran removed nuclear material from targeted sites ahead of time. That would not surprise me. It would not blow my mind if, if they didn't catch wind of this attack before it happened, at least catch wind of it when the bombers are in the air and approaching Iran. They probably catch wind of it and is like, all right, guys, let's move this stuff. I'm sure they have contingency plans for all of this, especially in these recent couple weeks where Israel and Iran have been popping off. Iran described its Monday attack on Israel as a new wave of its Operation True Promise 3, saying it was targeted. I feel like it's like the third sequel of it's like a movie franchise, right? The Operation True Promise was the hit. It was the first one. It was a huge hit, and then had Operation True Promise 2, which was in theaters and it didn't do so well. And then they had a straight to direct to DVD Operation True Promise 3. Even promisier. Promises were broken. I guess the promise wasn't Operation True Promise 3. I guess the promise wasn't true. Saying it was targeting the Israeli cities of Haifa and Tel Aviv, according to Iranian state television. In Israel, at least 24 people have been killed and more than 1,000 wounded in the war. Israeli strikes on Iran have killed at least 950 people and wounded 3,400 others, according to the Washington-based group Human Rights Activists. The group, which has provided detailed casualty figures from Iranian unrest, such as the protests surrounding the death of Mahsa Amini in 2022, said of those killed, it identified 380 civilians and 253 security force personnel. Okay, so a 50% civilian death rate and 50% military, that's actually not terrible. That's not terrible. It's not good, but it is, compared to many other recent conflicts in the area, that seems to be a better percentage than most, or maybe any of them. Calls for de-escalation. The U.S. described its attack on the Fordow and Natanz enrichment facilities, as well as the Isfahan nuclear site, as a one-off to take out Iran's nuclear program, but Trump has warned of additional strikes if Tehran retaliates. Mousavi described the American attacks as violating Iran's sovereignty and being tantamount to invading the country, the state-run IRNA news agency reported. But isn't Iran shooting missiles at Israel violating their sovereignty as well? And I would argue that, or just by virtue of being in a theocracy and Sharia law, that they're violating the sovereignty and the human rights of their own people. Putin called the Israeli and American attacks on Iran an absolutely unprovoked aggression. Absolutely unprovoked aggression. That is just like an absolute fabrication. It's so devoid from reality. Iran has been talking shit to Israel for decades. They've been talking about wiping both the U.S. and Israel off the face of the earth. They've been talking about making nuclear weapons. They've been talking about using those nuclear weapons. To say this is absolutely unprovoked, they shot missiles at Tel Aviv 2 months ago. To say this is absolutely unprovoked is insanity. Iran, which insists its nuclear program is for civilian purposes only, previously agreed to limit its uranium enrichment and allow international inspectors to access its nuclear sites under a 2015 deal with the U.S., France, China, Russia, Britain, and Germany in exchange for sanctions relief. The Iran nuclear deal. But after Trump pulled the U.S. unilaterally out of the deal, during his first term, Iran began enriching uranium up to 60%. A short technical step away from weapons-grade levels of 90% and restricting access to its nuclear facilities. We know for a fact, based in 2023, the International Atomic Energy Agency released a report that said we have proof, undeniable proof, that Iran is enriching uranium at least to 84%. I think they said 83.9% is what we detected in the facilities out in Tehran. We detected these particles in the air. And so they know for a fact that Iran is, at least since 2023, we've known that Iran is enriching uranium up to a weapons grade amount. And so we've known for quite a while that they've been... we know that probably since it wouldn't surprise me if since the closing of the Iranian nuclear deal, that is when they were like, all right, guys, guess we're making a weapon. This just seems like another really poor decision alongside Iran's choice to do the initial strike on Israel on June 13th or June 14th. It just seems like an extremely short-sighted decision that, like, it shows to me that they don't understand the game they're playing, right? Iran for a while has been playing this larger, I'm going to call it a meta game, in which they're playing this poke the bear game, right? They're poking the bear, which is Israel, right, in various different ways, by funding the Houthis in the north, by shooting a few missiles at them here or there, by, talking shit. There's all sorts of ways that Iran has been poking the bear, all right? And they need to understand, though, they don't understand the metagame of poking the bear, right? If the metagame is poking the bear, then you need to understand, like, well, if you poke a little too hard or a little too much, sometimes the bear is going to swipe at you and he's going to scratch you, and you just kind of have to, like, wait for the scratch to heal to go back to poking the bear, right? That's the metagame. If you're going to poke the bear, you kind of have to accept the fact that you're going to get scratched sometimes, and that you got to deal with that scratch and take it on the chin, and then can go right back to your metagame of poking the bear. Well, it seems to me like I thought they understood the metagame because they were playing that game for years. But it seems to me like the strike on Israel shows that they don't understand the metagame at all, because Israel came in, and the scratch that I'm referring to, right? They've been poking Israel for decades and decades, years and years, and then Israel comes in and scratched them. They say, okay, we're going to strike their nuclear facilities and a couple of your military sites and whatnot. Not your civilians. We're going to be very targeted and go after your nuclear facilities. We're not going to do regime change. We're going to go exclusively after your nuclear facilities, okay? Israel does this, and Iran needs, what they should have done is understand the metagame that they've been playing of poking the bear and say, look, guys, like, yeah, this sucks, but this is part of the game. We got scratched. We have to lick our wounds for a little bit and then go back to poking the bear. We just kind of have to take it. But they didn't do that. They've been poking the bear scratches, and then they punched the bear. Well, when you punch the bear's going to get pretty mad, and the bear is not going to just try and scratch you. Now they're going to try and hurt you. And so it just seems like to me like they didn't understand the metagame that they were playing, poking the bear, trying to tip, play footsie with Israel. They just were, it seems to me like they didn't understand the metagame that they were playing, and they went way too far and give Israel full justification to come in and fuck them up. And I feel like that's exactly what this choice to hit American air bases is. They're giving the U.S. pretty good justification to come in and do whatever they want. And so it just seems extremely stupid, extremely short-sighted. And on top of it all, most importantly, to me it shows that they do not or do not currently understand the larger metagame that they were playing with Israel when they were poking the bear. I thought they understood the game, but clearly they didn't. It almost seems suicidal to me. Like, if I wanted to create a way to collapse the Iranian government from within, this would be how I would. This is one of the ways I would try and do it, and create some level of plausible deniability while doing it. This is probably one of the ways that it would happen. About it, I saw that there's some huge swath of American public land is now going on sale or whatever. This, I feel like, only perpetuates a problem that I'm really passionate about, and it's called the concept of entrapment. So the concept of I don't mean the concept of entrapment legally, right? Entrapment is the idea that, like, prior, if you went back 500 years or more, most land was not fenced, right? There was towns, but then outside of like a town or a city, you just have woods, or you'd have unincorporated land. And if that land wasn't being used, then you could theoretically, like, you could distance yourself from society and go try and take care of yourself in the woods. That was a possibility. You could say, I'm not going to do what you guys want me to do. I'm not going to go pay the rent. I'm not going to go work in a job. I'm going to go just wander off in the woods and try and completely self-sustain myself and not be a part of what your guys got going on. And that was something that you could do. But over the last couple hundred years, specifically between like 1800 and 1950, this concept of entrapment happened really in the United States, but worldwide, but especially in the United States, where almost every bit of land has been bought, sold, and most importantly, has been fenced off. So now now you have to participate in society, right? Now, if you want to have a place to sleep, you have to pay rent or sleep on the sidewalk. There is no third option of wandering off into the woods and pitching a tent or building your own little log cabin. That is not an option anymore. And so that whole concept of like boxing everything, all this land in with fences and ownership and privation is called entrapment. And I think that it is a big problem for. I think it is a moralistic problem. But I think that this only exacerbates that problem even more. And also, this is the classic corporate short-term gain at the expense of long-term planning, right? This will be a quick cash injection to the U.S. government, but that's about it, right? Then all of this land goes into the hands of private landowners who I'm sure will use it for. It's just this is a really dumb idea, right? And like, people have talked about a Bitcoin strategic reserve. I think a far smarter thing is to have forests and land like this as a strategic reserve than to sell this stuff and have Bitcoin be a strategic reserve. Sell your stupid Bitcoin and have this be the strategic reserve. This seems far more tangible and far more useful in the real world. The Senate budget bill, also called the Reconciliation Bill, or Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act, is making headlines for its drastic cuts to Medicaid, its rollback of clean energy tax credits, and the fact that it would raise the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. It's also threatening to take away millions of acres of public land. Nearly 150 groups, including the Natural Resources Defense Council, the Center for Biological Diversity, and local organizations like Alaska Wilderness League and New Mexico Wild, have urged Senate members to reconsider this unprecedented sell-off of public lands. The Senate budget bill would be a fire sale of America's public lands and waters, Bobby McNeary, director of land conservation at the Natural Resources Defense Council, said in a statement. The first thing that comes to mind is, who's going to benefit most from all of this? Is it going to be the average American who doesn't have that much money in the bank and cannot afford to buy a 100-acre swath of really good, previously government-owned land? Or is it going to be the hundreds of millionaires and billionaires who could come over and buy these huge swaths of land to basically do absolutely nothing with, or to do only negative, cynical things with? I wonder which of these is going to benefit most from doing this kind of sale. I can't see any possible benefit to the average American from this at all. The bill would force the sale of between 2 million and 3 million acres of public land from the Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management, acres that span 11 western states. The state of Connecticut is about 3.1 million acres for comparison. The bill also makes even more public land eligible for sale. More than 250 million acres, including hiking trails, ski resorts, wilderness study areas, national monuments, and critical wildlife migration corridors. New areas would also be opened for oil leasing and offshore drilling under the bill, including the Gulf of Alaska. If passed, the bill would likely be the largest single sale of national public lands in modern history, according to the Wilderness Society. It's a move Senate Republicans are making, multiple groups note, in order to pay for billionaire tax breaks. The bill trades ordinary Americans' access to outdoor recreation for a short-term payoff that disproportionately benefits the privileged and well-connected, the Wilderness Society says. 100,000%. Who benefits from this? Not the average American. They are only negatively harmed by this. I would love to have a conversation with some of these Republican politicians about the concept of public lands, about the concept of the tragedy of the commons, about do they just want there to be zero public lands? Do they want, I get this impression they want everything to be private. They want every acre of land to be fenced off, to be private. And so, if you're not a landowner, if you don't have money, if you have no access to anything, basically. That's what they want. They want a completely locked down society, is what it just feels like. Senator Mike Lee, a Republican from Utah and chairman of the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, has also said the bill would create opportunities for housing. But totally. Yeah. They're going to buy these huge swaths of land and buy fucking urban sprawl McMansions that are totally going to help the housing cost situation we've got going in the country. Absolutely, 100%. Yeah. Building these suburbs in the middle of Utah. Yeah, that's totally going to work. Nobody's buying these swaths of land to buy to build affordable housing on, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make. But nature organizations say it would do no such thing. and that it would bring more harm to the public. Absolutely. There is no provision to prevent lands sold under Lee's bill from being developed into high-end vacation homes, Airbnbs, or luxury housing projects, which I would imagine would be the vast majority of like any building that would be going on, any residential building that would be going on in these places. It would be those types of stuff, because who's buying this land, right? It's not somebody looking to build, a bunch of communist-style apartment blocks. It's somebody looking to build big mansions and sell them for $5 million a piece. The letter, signed by dozens of organizations, reads, "Selling these lands," they add, "threatens public access, undermines responsible land management, puts environmental values, cultural resources, and endangered species at risk, along with clean drinking water for 60 million Americans, and betrays the public's trust." That 250 million acres of public lands are at risk can be hard to visualize. The Wilderness Society made an interactive map showing both the Bureau of Land Management and U.S. Forest Service lands the bill makes eligible for sale. The map illustrates how those 250 million acres span across 119 congressional districts, reaching all the way from Alaska down through the western United States and over past the Rocky Mountains. This bill would lead to a wave of irreversible extraction that will rob future generations of public access to lands and waters that belong to all of us, just to bankroll tax cuts for the super rich. McEnany said in his statement, "As currently proposed, Americans will soon lose permanent access to the public lands close to home, their favorite trails, their parks, and their favorite recreation areas. Once these lands are sold and the no trespassing signs go up, there will be no going back." Absolutely. It just further perpetuates this problem of entrapment. This idea that there are less and less public areas that people can access, less and less lands that people can go to, less and less areas that are not private property and that you would be trespassed off of. This seems like just such a terrible, terrible idea, especially within the context of the same administration pushing for some sort of ridiculous Bitcoin reserve or strategic Bitcoin reserve or whatever. It's just like it's asinine that they would want to have some sort of Bitcoin reserve at the same time they want to sell this stuff off. To me, it seems entirely ass backwards. You would want to keep these sorts of lands as your strategic reserve and sell off the U.S. Supreme Court upholds Tennessee law banning youth transgender care. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld a Republican-backed ban in Tennessee on gender-affirming medical care for transgender minors on Wednesday in a setback for transgender rights that could bolster efforts by states to defend other measures targeting transgender people. The court, in a 6-3 ruling powered by its conservative justices, decided that the ban does not violate the U.S. Constitution's 14th Amendment promise of equal protection, as challengers to the law had argued. The ruling affirmed a lower court's decision that backed Tennessee's law, which bars medical treatments such as puberty blockers and hormones for people under age 18 experiencing gender dysphoria. The Supreme Court's 3 liberal justices dissented. Tennessee concluded that there is an ongoing debate among medical experts regarding the risks and benefits associated with administering puberty blockers and hormones to treat gender dysphoria, gender identity disorder, and gender incongruence. The law's ban on such treatments responds directly to that uncertainty, conservative Chief Justice John Roberts wrote for this court's majority. Gender dysphoria is the clinical diagnosis. Okay, so that seems like a really silly argument, right? I feel like they're working backwards from their conclusion, and that's so obvious, right? These conservative justices don't like trans people, and they don't want them to be around. So they're going to work backwards from the perspective. They're going to basically say like, well, the science is uncertain whether this is a good thing, whether this sort of treatment is good or not. And so we're going to just basically, because it's uncertain, because it hasn't been proven explicitly to be good, that we are going to be against it. But like, my understanding is that it very much has explicitly been proven to be good, and that to the extent that you could find dissent for almost anything, you could create a counter argument for the good qualities of almost anything. And so I feel like he could make this argument for you could exchange the argument he's making here for so many different situations. Like, Gender dysphoria is the clinical diagnosis for significant distress that can result from an incongruence between a person's gender identity and the sex assigned at birth. Wednesday's ruling will have a broad impact, as Tennessee's law is one of 25 such policies enacted by conservative state lawmakers around the United States. Various other state restrictions have been enacted in recent years targeting transgender people, from bathroom use to sports participation, some limited to minors but other extending to adults. Liberal Justice Sonia Sotomayor, I think the fact that in a lot of these places these protections and changes in law apply to not only children but to adults buries the lead so bad for these people. It shows that it really, really is not about protecting kids. It is about they don't like trans people. They don't think they're real. They think it's a mental disorder. And so they want that out of society. I think their analysis really goes no much further than that for a lot of people. Liberal Justice Sonia Sotomayor expressed dismay that the Supreme Court largely deferred to the state legislature's policy choices in upholding the ban. By retreating from meaningful judicial review exactly where it matters most, the court abandons transgender children and their families to political whims. In sadness, I dissent, Sotomayor wrote, joined by fellow liberal justices Elena Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson. Tennessee's law, passed in 2023, aims to encourage minors to appreciate their sex by prohibiting healthcare workers from prescribing puberty blockers and hormones to help them live as a purported identity inconsistent with the minor's sex. Providers can be sued. Yeah, so this is so cynical and so... I know that there are people that are against transness in a good faith manner. And what I mean by that is they legitimately believe that it's hurting kids and that these people are the Democrats are pedophiles and they're really just trying to groom kids and blah, blah, blah. There are people that that legitimately believe this and have been tricked to believe this, and they believe this in good faith. But I just have such a hard time escaping the feeling that a large chunk of these Republicans, especially the more religious oriented ones, they are not coming from that position. They are coming from a more bad faith. I just don't like trans people. My religion, I think, says trans people are not real or not good, and therefore they work backwards from that conclusion. I can't help but think there's so much of that, because the proof that treating trans kids gender dysphoria when they're young, before they become adults, is their proof is there. It's undeniable, right? The suicide rates of transgender people who receive gender affirming care before the age of 18 versus those that receive it after the age of 18 or are unable to receive it prior to the age of 18, the suicide rate difference is tremendous. And that entirely makes sense, right? If you know from right at the beginning of puberty or just before puberty that you feel like you're in the wrong body, but that you're not stupid and you know how your body's going to change in the next few years, and you know that you're going to get further and further away from what you think your body should look like, then trying to do something then to prevent that from happening in the first place is the obvious best solution, right? And also these people are they talk about people who detransition, and they talk about, they use certain people who regret going on HRT or regret trying to change their gender as examples that this is all bad. But that's not an example of anything, right? You can find, I would imagine most people that detransition, that start on hormones and then stop taking them, don't see it as oh, I was tricked, I was duped, and this horrible thing happened to me, and blah, blah, blah. I almost guarantee you the vast majority of them don't see it like that. And that almost nobody sees it like that. And so the idea that it's some horrible tragedy if a kid goes on puberty blockers and hormone replacement therapy and then changes their mind, I think these same people think that the concept of that happening is impossible, that the child will just instantly die or something. But that is very much not the case. The child will develop entirely normally. Their puberty may be delayed a year or two or a couple of years or whatever, but does that really matter all that much? We don't have any proof that that's a problem. We only have proof that this is a benefit, right? That the suicide rates go down significantly, that from a literal healthcare perspective, quality, life years, reducing death from any serious healthcare perspective, treating trans kids absolutely does work. And I guarantee you that in the Supreme Court case, they presented plenty of evidence to the Supreme Court justices proving that. So the fact that the conservative justices are still, regardless of all the proof they were obviously presented, are coming out saying, well, we don't know, the science is unsure if it's actually a good thing. No, it's not. They would be saying that even if the science was overwhelming, as long as they had one dude who could come out and be like, actually, this isn't a good thing, or they could create one silly argument against it, they would be saying this exact same thing. This is like Sotomayor said, this seems like a complete abdication of their duty to do proper judicial review. Because they like the outcomes. They're saying we're not going to review it basically because we like what it's doing. By retreating from meaningful judicial review exactly where it matters most, the court abandons transgender children and their families to political whims. In sadness, I dissent, Sotomayor wrote, joined by fellow liberal justices Elena Kagan and Ketanji Brown Jackson. Tennessee's law, passed in 2023, aims to encourage minors to appreciate their sex by prohibiting healthcare workers. It's also super demeaning to use language like encouraging minors to appreciate their sex. Bro, no, 95% of all minors appreciate their sex just fine. It is the insanely small, 1% or less that are transgender people that don't appreciate their sex that you are explicitly saying you must appreciate your sex. It is very disrespectful to use this sort of wording. By prohibiting healthcare workers from prescribing puberty blockers and hormones to help them live as a purported identity inconsistent with the minor's sex. See, this to me shows anti-intellectualism and anti-academicism. Anti-academicism? That's definitely not a word, but I'm creating it right now. And the reason why is because a purported identity inconsistent with the minor's sex. A purported identity. That wording is very specific, okay? That wording is referring to gender. So they're saying they live as a gender that is inconsistent with their sex. Well, to me, that statement is completely illogical because it's not like some political position to say that gender and sex are two completely separate concepts. They are two completely separate different concepts, right? Gender is a social construct. Sex is a biological one, okay? Gender, you have some certain places, dresses and skirts are things that men can wear, and in a lot of places they aren't. But what biologically defines a man, the physical characteristics that we use to define being a male versus a female, does not change from culture to culture. But what we define as being a male or a female within different cultures in gender changes. And so this is completely anti-intellectual to assert a purported identity inconsistent with the minor's sex. Well, no, but the concept of identity consistent with the sex doesn't really make that much sense. There's identities that line up with the sex, but they are not one-to-one. They are not the same thing. Anybody who's asserting that gender and sex are the same thing is either hasn't done the research, is either ignorant of the information, genuinely does not know that is the case, or is purposefully being indignant, knows that is the case, but doesn't want to accept it for whatever backwards ass reason, and is just indignant about it. Providers can be sued and face fines and professional discipline under the law for any violations. The law allows these medications to be used for any other purposes, including to address congenital defects, early onset puberty, or other conditions. I wonder if a doctor could just prescribe, if a trans kid needs this HRT in Tennessee. I wonder if a loophole around this could be the doctor saying, well, I'm not prescribing this HRT for gender dysphoria. I'm prescribing it for a congenital defect. And then when somebody came to them and said, well, that's not typically what you prescribe for congenital defects, they just go, what are you gonna do about it? I wonder if that's a loophole around this. That'd be pretty cute. But I also would question doctors' willingness to try and skirt the rules like that because they know they could lose their medical license if they did find a way to punish them for doing such a thing. Tennessee Attorney General Jonathan Skrmetti welcomed Wednesday's ruling, saying that the state legislature had voted to protect kids from irreversible decisions they cannot yet fully understand. Yeah, like I said, these guys are just I don't know why this terrifies them so much, but it just absolutely terrifies the idea of a child starting HRT or puberty blockers or whatever and then changing their mind after however much time. I don't know why this idea just terrifies them so much, like it's the end of the world. It is not. I would love to poll the people who detransition or change their minds about if they regret their decision or if this was some horrible thing that happened to them. I would be extremely, extremely surprised if anything more than a tiny fraction of those people said that this was a problem or a serious regret of theirs or whatever. Challengers argued that the law discriminates against these adolescents based on sex and transgender status, violating the 14th Amendment. Tennessee has said it is banning risky, unproven gender transition interventions, pointing to scientific uncertainty, tightened restrictions in some European countries, and first-hand accounts of regret and harm from people who discontinue or reverse treatments. Risky, unproven gender transition interventions. They are not risky nor unproven. We use hormone replacement therapy regularly on non-transgender people for all sorts of issues, for thyroid issues, for weight issues, for as you get older, your hormone levels just get off sometimes. Like, it is not risky, first off, okay? And unproven is not true either. We've been doing this for decades, so there's absolutely nothing unproven. There are plenty of people who grew up on these medications and are now into middle age, adulthood, and are totally fine. So to say it's unproven is ridiculous. And to say that there's scientific uncertainty, well, there's scientific uncertainty about everything to some degree, but scientific uncertainty about what is the question? There is no scientific uncertainty about the effectiveness of this treatment. I don't know what the scientific uncertainty they're referring to is, right? We know how these medications react long term. Like, we know they're safe medications. We know we know the risks associated with them. Every medication has side effects and whatnot, but also, if you finding a few people that have firsthand accounts of regret and harm, it doesn't mean anything. Like I said, you can find people that regret going on their dream vacation. I mean, what is that supposed to mean? Medical associations, noting that gender dysphoria is associated with higher rates of suicide, have said gendered-affirming care can be life-saving and that long-term studies show its effectiveness. Absolutely. Lucas Cameron Vaughn, a lawyer at the ACLU of Tennessee, said this ruling creates a class of people who politicians believe deserve health care and a class of people who do not. Yeah, that is one way to think about it. Absolutely. In a June 11th, 12th Reuters IPSOS poll of Americans, 53% of respondents said they supported laws that prevent transgender children under the age of 18 from getting medical treatment related to gender identity and gender transitioning. Wow, that is shocking. 53% of respondents said they supported laws that prevent transgender children from... That is scary. Okay, to me, that says that the propaganda effort that these anti-trans people have been doing for the last 3, 4, 5, 10 years or whatever has been working, especially the last couple of years. The anti-trans sentiment I've seen has exploded. That it shocks me that it's over 50%, but it's also super, super sad because the science is there. The medical proof is there that this is a good treatment, that it makes sense, that there is that there is no real good reason to ban it. There is no logical reason to ban it and only bad reasons. And the result is going to be harming these people. There is going to be more transgender people that commit suicide in their early adulthood as a result of not being able to get access to the hormone replacement therapy they knew they needed growing up. And super cynically, I think that's what a lot of these people actually want. Not all of them. Not all of them. I would never make that assertion. Okay. Many of them legitimately in good faith believe that this is bad and harmful for people and that Democrats are pedophiles or whatever. But I think that there is way more people that want to admit that they hate trans people. Their religion tells them to hate trans people. They are bigoted internally for whatever reason, and that they are totally okay with trans people killing themselves or whatever. And I know it sounds crass, and people are gonna be like, oh, there's no way they don't actually really want them to kill themselves, but it's more like they're indifferent towards it. If that is the way that trans people get out of society, they're sort of just okay with it. But 53% shows that over half the country just doesn't care about, or at least half of the people that responded to this poll don't care at all about the science or the medical fact or being correct. They don't care. They just eat up whatever slop the media is telling them to eat up, and the anti-trans narrative that the media has sort of run with over the last couple of years has fed into that. It's disgusting that 53% say that they are against. There are 4 laws that ban this sort of treatment. The Supreme Court on May 6th permitted Trump's administration to implement his ban on transgender people in the military while legal challenges play out. Yeah, I think it's also hilarious that, like, typically when the Supreme Court has one of these sort of legal challenges or legal questions or whatever, they'll issue an injunction saying, okay, you can't do the trans military ban until we we iron it out in our courts whether this is legit or not. We don't know, so we're going to put it on pause.